Men of Reddit, when have you experienced sexism? Well, here goes, I guess. I lived across the street from a now ex-friend, we'll call her Laura, who had a new daughter that we'll call Penny, a year and some change old. Slightly relevant that the father was not in the picture. Now, I'm usually not a kid person. Any of them below 8th grade or so are like kryptonite to me. For whatever reason, I loved this kid. She had a smile that melted my heart and made whatever paternal instincts I have kick in. Full bore would lay down my life to make sure this little rugrat was okay. Always watched Penny when Laura had to work or go to class, since I was a bartender at the time and had most of the day off. My then girlfriend was always home as well, so it was fun to Google at the whole baby idea. We'd go to the park, take nice strolls around the neighborhood. Then, one day, my then girlfriend left the house to go run some random task, and it was just myself hanging out with Penny. Laura got home early and came to pick her up, put her hair into the customary time to go forehead ponytail thing because it's funny, damn you, and handed her over when her ma got to the door and had the how did the day go chit chat. Eventually, Laura asked where girlfriend was and went silent when I told her she was out and about. Snatched up all the baby gear without a word and practically booked it across the street. Very long story I'll condense from here on out. We didn't get to watch Penny anymore, which broke my heart, and our interaction with Laura stopped, which was fine, because I'm a stubborn bastard, and will play the cold shoulder game until the day I die. A couple months later, it came about that Laura was fine with both the girlfriend and I watching Penny, but not me by myself because, I'm sure you saw it coming, I'm a guy and inherently a pedophile, and would abuse her child the first moment I could get. Yeah, I still miss the little budger. My family adopted two high-risk girls aged 11 and 12 when I was 17, and so many people thought it was a bad idea because I was 100% going to rap them. My older/larger female cousin could hit and punch me all she wanted, but when I did it, I was a monster and punished. 7th grade English teacher would let girls out of class before guys because guys were rude and girls should get to go to lunch first. I worked at a coffee shop where I was the only guy for a while, and taking out the trash and lifting the heavy stuff was just my job because I was best suited for it. It got so bad that I eventually said, well, I'm not doing the dishes or cleaning the bathroom because you guys are more suited for that job. Edit update. I'm okay with people doing the right job for them, and honestly I like taking out the trash, but when I wasn't working the trash still got taken out, which means they were capable of doing it, or worse they would leave all the trash from the night before, so I can take it. My main issue with everything was I had to do more work than anyone else, because I was a guy, and for no other reason. The good news is, when I told them off about it they understood, and I never had to clean the bathrooms again, which is by far my least favorite thing in the world. Conscription. Women don't have it. I'm not against it by the way. I think it should be universal. Conscription. Women's physical tests, if they choose to serve, are a faking joke. This leads to chicks with excellent scores being destroyed when they are put in with people who are actually in good shape and the whole unit suffers. Meanwhile it's hailed as equality and a victory for feminism by people who don't have to wait for their squad leader to catch the fuck up with them because she was told she was in excellent condition. Gender quotas. Because Jesus faking Christ, fuck that. Get those for sewer divers, binmen, and street cleaners as well. Didn't hit me personally, but two of my friends sucked major ass. One of them turned rather bitter because of it. Took him a while to get over the issue. Man up, be a man, whenever said by a woman. Basically it means treat me special, sacrifice yourself, submit. Again, fuck that. We're all equal, woman the fuck up. A couple of times there's been a drunk woman who has attacked a man in a bar. People have asked me to intervene and protect her. Fuck that. We are equal now. She got herself into that situation, so she will bear the consequences. A chick once even tried to punch me because I said something along those lines. Now, I'm over 90 kilograms, military police officer during conscription, powerlifter with 12 years of martial arts / assorted ball locks. This girl was much lighter than me and no real threat, but as she was swinging all I could think of was no guy would ever do this. Again, not me, since I have no kids, but I've seen a man lose his children because of faked up custody legislation. The depression was crushing, and there was really nothing I could do to help him despite trying. Luckily he finally decided not to kill himself. All in all, could be worse I guess. I stopped really caring about most of the stuff. I used to be real salty. Just avoid obvious dangers like marriage and kids without a prenup. Legal pitfall. Avoid crazy people, since as a man you'll always be the suspect. If anything ever happens, enjoy your life. Just ignore all that sexism stuff, since nobody actually cares about it if a man claims to have suffered from it. I'm a dad. One day I took my wife to the waxing place to get pampered at her request. So I took my daughter age 3 at the time to go play at a local park. As she was so small and there were so many older kids around, I opted to follow along with her and join in her little games. We wandered around the playground and I helped her when she needed me and otherwise let her have a good time. The entire time I'm getting dirty looks from parents and people audibly making crude comments. Then comes the text from my wife that she's all done and it's time to pick her up. This is where shit goes down. Now I don't wear a wedding ring as I do a lot of manual tasks that could otherwise get caught up honoring. So I tell my daughter that it's time to leave. So like any 3-year-old that's been told to stop having fun, she looses her sheet. I tell her it's time to go get mommy and she's still crying and screaming. I don't want to go, don't make me leave. She yells such that everyone can hear. She's tugging at my hand that is now around her is tugging her along as she throws a fit. Meanwhile everyone who was staring at me before is now on alert and is eyeing me like a mob ready to kill. One guy starts walking toward us like he's going to kick my ass. The entire group of adults look at me, heads following my movements like some robotic zombie monsters. I tell her, honey, we have to go pick up mommy, and she finally yells, but daddy, I don't want to leave. All I can think is, thank God she said daddy. Suddenly the guy stops and all the heads simultaneously turn back to what they were doing like the monsters can't sense me anymore. The zombies suddenly lose interest. My heart was racing thinking I was going to be mobbed. Finally I tell her we can come back after we pick mommy up. Only then does she calm down and walk with me. I guess you can't be a dad out with your kid. You have to be a pedophile. If it was my wife, no one would have so much as looked up. I know because on the return trip she had a fit again, but it was my wife this time tugging her along. They were invisible to the surrounding parents. TLDR, almost got mobbed at the park because my kid had a fit and they thought I was kidnapping her. Was walking my puppy. I live near a preschool. Kids all wanna pet him. Obviously, because he was ridiculously adorable. I had a really great time answering the children's questions and helping the ones who were a bit scared say hello to him, etc. I had a trauma when I was young and did not get to be a kid myself, so seeing their childlike wonder is amazing. I want to work with kids, help them any way I can to have a good childhood. As a mentor or teacher. Eventually 2 female staff comes over to check what the fuzz was all about. When they see me, they start asking me all these questions. Why are you here? What do you want? Why are you interacting with the kids? How old are you? Eventually one took me to the side and said it is very troubling that I do this and that I should just walk away. She sounded like she was making a threat. So me and the puppy took our leave. The kids were rightfully disappointed and to this day I don't walk that way anymore. It's not the first time I've interacted with kids and something like this has happened. One kid was lost in the store. He was obviously scared and asked me to hold his hand. So I took his hand and walked with him to find his mother. We found her and she gave me the most horrible look I've ever gotten from someone. My fear of being accused of being a pedophile has put my dream of helping kids to a stop. I was abused as a child and to be accused of doing what that person did to me. I can't take it. I came to this a bit late, and I know this will get buried, but this is the first thing that's ever genuinely applied to me. I work in a business development center for a car dealership. I genuinely enjoy the job, pays decent for my age, and I work with my fiancée. Keep in mind we have monthly goals and commission and I'm almost always the top performer in the room, which is predominantly females. I've always been able to tell that my boss has been a bit sexist. However, it becomes very clear when I get called out for things the females can do whenever they please. For instance, if I touch my phone while I'm there I get talked to. If I say something a little off on his phone, I get talked to. The girls in the room are blatantly on their phones and shopping online while on the clock. The girls can come in 45 minutes past their shift starting. I came in late 3 minutes past my shift after texting her because of a snowstorm and she gives me shit. Also, every time I have to talk to her about something work related she always groans and sounds like I'm being an inconvenience. And when the girls do the same, she peps up her voice and kisses their ass. I wish I could describe to you how much this bothers me every day, but sexism towards males doesn't exist, right? Edit. Sorry for spelling mistakes. Typing this on an iPhone was miserable. This happened to a friend of mine. He was dating this girl, totally hot, totally crazy. After a while she dumped him, and he was pretty faked up about it, so we started taking him to clubs to get drunk and meet new girls. Eventually they end up seeing each other at the club. They have a drink. They dance. Long story short they end up back at his place. I guess she saw something, or he said something, that made her realize he had slept with another girl and she went full Thunder Cunt the Destroyer. She came at him with a hammer, which he disarmed, and then a kitchen knife. He was drunk and didn't know what to do, so he disarmed her, choked her out, called the cops, and threw her in the bathroom, and closed the door. Cops come and access the situation. Talk to her for a second, talk to him for a second, then tell him they want to talk to him privately. Could he come outside to their car? He follows them, and the second he steps on the sidewalk they arrest him for being drunk in public, and later try to pursue charges for assault for him attacking her. Total horseshit. Where to even begin? In every job I've worked in. My first job was a stock boy at a convenience store. I was young and was trying to do something part-time to save up for university. I stayed with that job till about second year university. At that point I was the weekend manager. Anyway, so it was Sunday night, and although normally there were 3 people working, on that day there were 2, me and a lady on cash. It was around 6 PM and wasn't busy. A shipment came in which meant that I had to organize it into the freezer and stock whatever was low. Problem was, you couldn't hear the PA in the freezer. I told the lady on the cash that I was going to be in the freezer, but that I would step out every 10 to 15 minutes to check up on her. I went in, then checked up on her, and it was fine. The second time I came out, she ran up to me, screamed at me some men were here, and I was afraid that they were going to try to rob us, and you weren't there. I said, are they still here? She responded no. Did they try to rob us? She said no, but if they did, I'm a woman. I could have been hurt. You are the man. You should have been here. I shit you not. This is what she said. She then started crying. I apologized and told her that I wouldn't go back to the freezer. However, since she was obviously upset, I offered to let her take a long paid break, and that I wouldn't tell the owner that she took this break, and I also offered to let her go home. Instead of taking me up on either of those offers, she sat beside the cash register crying while I helped customers. When I was trying to cash out some customers, some of them said, what the fuck did you do to her? What's wrong with you? The next day, the owner sat me down and told me that what I did was wrong and that it was my job to protect her. I sat there going, like, protect her from what? Nothing happened. He said, I know, but women need to be protected. I was confused at what was coming out of his mouth. For one thing, I don't even know this woman. And, for another, what did he think I was going to do if some guy with a gun came in and wanted all of the money in the register? Did he think I would take a bullet for her? Fuck no. Anyway, I quit on the spot. In a non-work related incident, me and a female friend of mine were planning on being roommates and were seeing places together. We went to see this apartment and then we went out for lunch. As we were sitting there eating and talking, my friend stops our conversation and says, hey, look at that kid. Look at what she's doing. She's so gorgeous. I look over, start laughing and said, oh my god, She is so freaking cute. As I said that, the mother turns around and gives me the nastiest look. I literally felt like I had just wrapped her daughter. Even my friend noticed the look she gave me. I can go on and on and on and on. It's very common. My ex-wife physically and mentally abused our son and I during the last 18 months that we lived with her. Physically assaulted my son twice during visitations, then broke into our apartment and attacked me in front of our son so viciously that he wanted to start punching her. He was 10. Lost all our money unbeknownst to me prior to me filing for divorce. Told our son when he was 10, I hate you and you were never a part of my family. I never want to see you again and I hope you rot in hell. The trauma and abuse has thrown him into a constant depression and periodic rage, and has also caused him to self-medicate with illegal substances. When I left her finally, and took my son with, she had access to 12 credit cards and 6 bank accounts, and I had $1,000 to my name. She drained every account. She has a master's degree and I have a HS diploma. But she doesn't like to work, so I'm responsible for her financial needs. Up until a year ago, she had not paid child support for 5 years. My son has required constant treatment and medical care for the past 2 years, during which he has had 2 drug overdoses. I have completely drained my IRA and I have no savings left at all. Despite the divorce decree declaring her partially responsible for medical care and school expenses for our son, the court hasn't forced her to pay a dime because she is lazy and refuses to get a job. After her crazy legal antics during our divorce proceedings, attacking her attorney outside the courtroom, attacking my attorney inside the courtroom, yelling obscenities at me while on the stand, and much more, ended up costing me over $90,000, leaving me $50,000 in debt. She was allowed to reopen our case and pursue much higher maintenance payments. This forced me to declare bankruptcy, and I had to represent myself. The new judge, who didn't bother learning anything about the history of our case and her antics, denied every reasonable motion of mine, including begging for a continuance to take my son to a treatment center out of state, and pleading for some financial relief to afford medical treatment for my son. I guarantee you, if a male did all of the above, they'd lock him up and throw away the key. But in my case, I'm forced to pay her $2,000 a month, get this, for the rest of her life. She only has to pay $312 a month in child support now, but the newest decree is worded as such that I can request money for medical bills. However, the judge made his decree retroactive, so her attorney would just say that I owe back maintenance due to the new order. In the original decree, the judge declared that I didn't have to pay any maintenance. However, she fooled this one. I work my ass off to barely pay the bills. I can't afford the treatment my son needs, and I have 7 years of bankruptcy to get through before I can even dream of doing normal things like buy a home or a car. If I was a woman, things would be much different. I was sexually abused and a subject of revenge born a few years ago by my ex. Distant family, mainly elders, 60 plus, all told me I should have enjoyed it. I'm surprised you didn't post the video yourself, or it's not really rap though, is it? People at school laughed. That one freak in school who complained about getting laid. I felt so embarrassed and ashamed I didn't even dare tell school or the police. My mother, bless her soul, tried to do it for me, but I stopped her every time. At the time, whenever anything about it was brought up about it, I just started crying. A short while after I was diagnosed with clinical depression and was told it could be genetic. About a year later, and I was slowly crawling out the emo hole I fell into thanks to the mix of depression and a genuinely shitty life, and I started getting angrier about it. About the ex, about what she did to me, about my injustice. I was 13 and the time, had barely started masturbating when it happened. I can't even say I'm angry or disappointed anymore, not even any emotion for the whole experience. In fact, multiple times I've thought about reaching out to the ex in question and apologizing for shitty behavior, because I was a bit of an asshole back then. I can't say it affects me too bad nowadays. Occasional flashbacks and a ever so slight fear of sex after 3 years isn't bad going for what I went through. I can talk about, watch, all sorts of stuff about sex. Just still yet to lose the virginity I hold onto in my mind. Finally, something I can weigh in on here. TLDR, helped out a woman in the parking lot and then got into a screaming match in an elevator because I'm a man and held the door open. So there is a huge woman empowering movement happening where I live right now, and it seems to have unfortunately fallen into the category of being cool, which means that every idiot in the country has this idea that empowerment means nothing more than using an opportunity to become an outrageous asshole to anyone with a different letter chromosome than yours given the first opportunity. What ended up happening was two things. There was a lady in the car park who couldn't, and I mean, could not park her car, and ended up getting out and asking me to park for it for her. So, yup, sure, no problem. I was the first behind her waiting patiently. These things happen and no bother. Did the deed in no time at all. Assured her there was no problem. Seemed grateful and I quickly fought up to another level, parked my car, and went about my business. Later, and I'm talking less than 5 minutes later, I was in the elevator landing on what transpired to be her floor, and I seen her move towards the elevator from a distance. Now the elevators are slow here. I assumed that whoever pushed the button just got fed up waiting and took the stairs. But the lady in question here started to trot towards the elevator doors looking like she was about to shit her pants. In nothing more than a polite gesture, I stood against the door so it wouldn't shut on her. Once she got in, she launched into this faking tirade of abuse as soon as she got there. My god, she asked, amongst other things, was it because she was a woman? What sort of man am I to assume that she was incapable of doing anything? How it's people like myself holding women back from the good things in life? How my parents must be at fault for bringing up such a chauvinistic pig? How could I be allowed to undermine women in such a demeaning way by forcing charity on her? Well, I'm not going to lie. I had a shitty day, so I faking exploded with similar ferocity back at her. My parents raised me with what are called manners. Had I not held the door for her, it would have been a faceplant the Looney Tunes would have been proud of. What type of a man am I to assume she wasn't capable of doing anything? I'm not. I don't care on your genitals. You're the best person for the job. Then you're the best person for the job. Just cause you have a vagina does not mean you have a license to be a cunt. And how am I holding you back when she wasn't the one able to park her own faking car? And what's this about holding women back from all the good things in life? What bullshit is this? A significant part of my life is women, and they have saved my life by reassuring me that I'm the best part of this, thanks to my mum and my ex. Without those ladies in my life, I would cease to be around today. Before that shouting match ended, I gathered my thoughts, apologized for what she thought I did wrong, and demanded an apology of her, which I never got, and parted ways. And for what was already a shitty day, I spent the rest of it absolutely fuming angry. I couldn't wait to get home and see my dog, who also is a girl, so she could put a smile on my face and let the troubles of a beach of a day just melt away. I understand this movement is important, and rightly so, and I refuse to let one experience in the negative impact my opinion of the rest of the cause, a cause worthy of a fight. But if you're going to follow a cause, be educated in it. Just because there is inequality of certain aspects of life, and on a personal note, by and large, it is not as bad as it was years ago, that does not entitle you to bully the first person that shows you manners out of pure decency. Faking hell, would it kill someone to show some class? Sorry for the rant, it only happened on Sunday, and I'm still going over the argument again and again in my head. Alright, cracks knuckles. Whenever my sister wanted me off the TV, or off the computer, she would say mom/dad, crazy cockkids hit me, and I would be instantly grounded with no due process. Whenever C's did hit me, then for no apparent reason other than she's a girl, she's not aggressive, I had to prove she hit me. If there was no mark or a witness, then I was automatically punished for lying to get her in trouble for fifth times. She did not leave a mark, ergo she would essentially hit me, and I would be punished, because boys are more aggressive, and are ergo more likely to be the one who initiates it. Me, at 22, paid roughly 165% of what my sister did for car insurance at the same age. Even though my sister had received 2 speeding tickets and had been in a car accident, which, to be fair, was not her fault, so it should not have affected her rates at all, which it probably didn't by that time. Why? Because by default, males at that age are seen as high risk for auto insurance, so despite multiple years of no traffic accidents or tickets, I have to pay more just because I'm male. Even my dad, who has not received any speeding tickets, nor been the cause of an accident, pays more for auto insurance than my mother. Was denied a scholarship because it wouldn't look good if we gave it to another male student. Junior high. Witnessed a girl kick a boy right in the crotch. Despite multiple people telling the teachers that she did it and that he didn't do a thing, she got off scot-free. No ice, no os, no detention, nothing. If I had done that, I'd have been instantly expelled. Went on Tumblr. Someone stole my phone. While I tried to chase them, some woman threw an elbow right in my stomach. Bus driver did nothing until some guy stood in her way and said that was rude, and then the bus driver went right out of his seat and practically physically threw the guy off because you never treat a lady like that. Walked to City Park to play some frisbee golf. Lady about middle age threatened to call the cops on me because I was staring at kids. Sister is a teacher in high school. During education class, the male students were flat out warned to never apply for anything below middle school/jr high, otherwise people will think you are a pedophile. Obligatory. Not a guy, but have a few examples of sexism. When I was about 5 years old, my mother took me away from my father, and she and some of her nasty friends were physically abusive and neglectful of me for a year. My dad went to court for custody rights. He was almost denied custody because apparently a daughter needs a mother figure, even if it meant one who was beating me up. My grandmother agreed to help my dad look after me, which even his lawyer said was the only reason he received full custody. While with my mother during that time, she got us into a women's refuge by lying and claiming that my father had beaten her. Most other women there also bragged that they had told similar lies to get accommodated there. Some had even gotten their spouses/partners wrongfully arrested. These women would laugh about how they were believed without question, simply for being women. More than a few female friends claimed that men had to pay for dates, particularly the first date. Their reasoning for this being that they are men and it's their responsibility to pay for dates. Went to the police with a male friend to report that his girlfriend had raped him. They turned him away saying there was nothing they could do. I've heard girls claim that they don't like going down on men and then get pissed off when a man doesn't want to go down on them. Had an argument with someone who quite honestly gives women a bad name. She confided in me that she had purposely stopped taking her pill and had convinced her boyfriend that they didn't need to use a condom because he could trust her. She was pissed off at me for telling him. Apparently he wasn't a real man because he wouldn't give her a baby, and that it's a man's responsibility to give a woman a baby when she wants one. The same woman who was cool with me being child free because, in her words, it's not a woman's job to give a man a baby just because he wants one. I changed my name and a friend at my university asked why. I explained that I had been a victim of abuse by my family and didn't feel happy with a set of names that, for me, were so strongly associated with my abusers. She assured me that out of all my family, I would definitely end up forgiving my mother. When I explained the situation and that my mother had been the only one to hit me, she admitted she assumed it was my dad who would have beaten me. Fair play to her. She apologized and admitted she shouldn't have assumed. Though she also shouldn't have suggested in the first place that I was going to welcome my abusers back into my life either. I study psychology, counseling, and therapies and have heard plenty of sexist shit in regards to mental health and men. A few examples being what have men got to be depressed about? Good, we could use less of them in response to 80% of suicide victims being men. And I know one guy who was turned away from his therapist because men can't have eating disorders. Being forced to live with my diagnosed bipolar mother with no prior work experience, no job, and no actual income, while my father runs his own business and had no mental issues to be heard of. I moved in with him about 9 months ago thankfully. For my dad, he was jailed without recompense after because my mom called the cops on him with no evidence, saying he called her with a death threat. He was put in holding for 48 hours with a drug addict, and my mom dodged the court date when it came up. No phone records were provided as proof. Nothing. When my sister would punch me in the arm, it was okay. She has the shoulders of a faking Linebacker. Those punches hurt like hell. If I were to give her a smack or tap back, I'm the bad guy. She's better about it lately, but that's mainly because I only see her half as much. Back in middle school it was separate ed, and the girls basically always went first for everything. Lunch, leaving rooms, etc. This one's a bit more religiously based, but there's a law in Judaism that no one ever follows anymore, that men aren't supposed to hear women sing. So at the middle school talent show, the guys would go first, do their things, and then be sent back to have class, while the girls would go on for another hour and a half. The funny thing is it didn't even make a faking difference. The walls were thin. We heard them in the classrooms anyway from the auditorium. My class had an actual forum regarding that with a few of our teachers as to how it was unfair to impose an archaic custom that none of the boys in the school followed on us. A partner I was seeing put her fist through my car window during an argument. I contacted the police, and she was arrested for malicious damage. After they took my statement, the police asked me to leave the premises. Literally 2 to 3 days later, at 6 AM the police show up on my doorstep handing me an apprehended domestic violence order and court summons notice to defend myself in court for domestic violence. After I left, the police somehow changed the story, even after statements and evidence had been gathered, and turned it on me, presumably because women don't commit domestic violence. I attended court 4 times, having to take time off work with a folder full of evidence and no lawyer. Every single time it faced court, the police officer and partner did not show up, leading to the case constantly being adjourned. After almost a year of having a violence order against me, the case was thrown out due to them never showing up in court. Window cost me $500 to fix plus time off work to attend court, which I see no return for. I have text messages, photos, and tons of evidence of her saying she was smashed it, and that she shouldn't be charged, because you should not call the police on your partner. Run into the same cop a few times now, treats me like shit, as if I've assaulted her. Funny enough, a later case occurred where she hit me and broke a mirror on another car. I reported it to the police and the same cop read my statement and told me to watch out, and got super aggro at me over me apparently assaulting her. He seemed to calm down when she actually admitted it was true. Still doesn't like me, even though I never did anything wrong. In my old circle of friends, I had a guy friend who I've known since we were in 2nd grade, and another girl who I'd only known a couple years. This girl was very into my friend. He confided in me that on several occasions she had sexually assaulted him by grabbing his genitals or force him to touch hers. Each time he stopped it and firmly told her he was not interested, but she never took the hint. Then one night we had all gone out, a group of about 15 people, to the pub for drinks, and then came back to my friend's place for some more drinking and hanging out. My friend had a lot to drink at the pub, and near passing out. He managed to get to the bathroom and throw up for about 10 minutes, and then stumbled into his bedroom and passed out. This girl who was really into him saw this as her chance. She excused herself from the drinking game we were playing and went to the bathroom. After a couple minutes she came out and snuck into my friend's room and closed the door. Since I knew what he had done before I was watching her the whole time, she was very grabby with my friend even at the pub while he was pissed drunk. I followed after her and went into my friend's room to find her getting under the covers with my friend, who was clearly unconscious. I told her to get out of the room immediately. She just screamed back at me too that I was a pervert for bursting in on her and my friend. Other people there heard what was happening and came down the hall and removed me from the room and closed the door and told me to quit being a creep and leave her alone. I had another friend who was close with me and my friend. I went and told her what was happening and she nearly lost it. She stormed into the room and told the girl in my friend's bed, now with his pants off, to get the fuck out now, get out of the house, or she will call the police. All those guys that came by and called me a creep and forced me out of stopping my friend from being raped now helped remove this girl from the house. I learned a few things that night. 1. Women are allowed to sexually assault men, even in public surrounded by people, with no repercussions, even if they are told not to repeatedly. It's just seen as cute when they are persistent. 2. A woman taking advantage of an unconscious man should not be disturbed because she is doing him a favor. 3. A man is not allowed to step in to stop a sexual assault or rap because doing so means he is a pervert and probably a rapist. 4. If a woman says a sexual assault or rap is happening, she must be believed immediately, solely because she is a woman. I told my friend what happened later, and he said he didn't remember most of the night, and definitely didn't remember what happened after he'd blacked out. He thanked me for doing what I could to stop it, and that wasn't the first time a woman had rapped him. Several years later a woman had rapped him while he was high and incoherent. That time he was aware of what was happening, but couldn't stop it. The girl who I tried to stop assaulting him stopped being invited to group gatherings. I was, however, treated very differently by our group of friends after that night. Even though everyone eventually figured out what was going on and that I was trying to help, they still saw me as some kind of pervert trying to sexually assault that girl. I stopped associating with that group of friends shortly after. I'm a trans man who has had experience with both misogyny and misandry. Pre-transition. Fishmonger first catcalled my mom and dad at the market when I was 12. Has continued throughout life and will continue until I start to look physically male. Misogynist verbal abuse throughout childhood from my father and not being able to have any reasonable conversation with him because of my sex. My brother had absolutely none of the same treatment. Professor repeatedly tried hitting on me when I was 18. Sounds minor, but when you consider my age and the fact that I was afraid to say no because of his position of authority, it gets pretty terrifying. Other professors, male and female, I knew actually sexually assaulted their students, also male and female. Internet comments that I looked like a man and would never get laid because I dress butch. The first part didn't bother me so much, but the second part did, because I already had such serious issues with my body. During transition, half my feminist support network falling out from beneath me, because I'm a man now, and don't deserve the help of women's emotional labor. Flat out denials that trans men can be the victims of hate crimes for their gender, sitting in the gender therapist's office being asked to prove my manliness by answering what kind of toys I was interested in as a child. Being told by other men, including trans men, that I look and act too effeminate for walking / talking / dressing the wrong way, or statements along the lines of, if you were a real man, you wouldn't. I've heard that the last thing continues for post-transition trans men, and the more physically male you look, the more nervous women are around you, and the more careful you have to be when interacting with women and children. Which is really depressing for someone who's been on both sides of the divide. Some people react with disbelief and start demanding details of the "well, what were you wearing" variety. There is a pretty common assumption that I'm exaggerating or even lying because mothers just don't abuse sons, or that I'm crazy and totally mistaken about what happened, or why, because mothers just don't abuse sons, or that I should forgive her because she was trying her best, because mothers just don't abuse sons. I've had people tell me flat out that it never happened. I've had people uncomfortably ask me if it was really all that bad. I've had people say shit that would get them torn apart in public if they were telling a woman who'd been abused by her father the same things. Well, she loved you is probably the worst one, because no, she faking didn't, and b, that is the textbook line that abusers use. Don't faking say that to abuse victims of any gender. But women are nurturing and loving and non-violent, and men are toxic, right? Not everyone said stupid ignorant shit like that. I've spoken to sympathetic audiences. I've lost some friends over it. I've kept more. But the concept of a mother who abuses is so foreign to so many people that I've gotten used to the pause and the delicate questions as people struggle with the idea of a woman doing bad things. TLDR men, even 6-year-old ones, can't be abused. Mothers can't abuse children. I work as a concierge at a high-end resort. They have an amazing spa that I take full advantage of. We get discounted services. I know the particulars of the services far better than my female counterparts as I try to experience everything we offer. One day I was helping an older lady with her spa selections and was explaining the particulars of each service in detail and offering suggestions based upon the results she hoped to achieve. This woman stops me mid-sentence and blatantly says, "I don't think men know about these enough. Do you have a woman on your team that can help me?" I placed her on hold and transferred her to my colleague who was working, who was female. This girl was very nice, but she had been with us less than a month and had not experienced the spa and only had our menu to recite from. So this woman lost the chance to have a crafted experience that highlights her likes and fulfills her goals because she didn't think men can know about spa treatments. From what I recall, she chose a yoga massage that we only have male therapist qualified for. I wish I could have seen her face when she showed up for her treatment by a man. Not a man, but this happened to one of my mum's cousins. He had a son with this girl. It didn't last very long and they split up. She used to go out a lot drinking, etc. Basically she was just quite irresponsible and ended up being very manipulative towards him, using the son, probably about 8 months old at this time, as a weapon and stopped him seeing his son altogether. He took her to court to try to get custody of his son, or at least split time by court order, gave evidence and said that he didn't think she was taking care of the baby properly, but they still awarded full custody to the girl. He was allowed to see his son something like once a week, but that often didn't happen. He kept fighting to get custody because he had suspicions she was neglecting him, but couldn't prove it, which was the issue. It is quite difficult to find hard evidence of it. Unfortunately, it took quite a tragic turn. About 6 months later she went out on a 3-day bender and just didn't come home. The baby died of dehydration as he was left alone in his cot, and she got sent to prison. Obviously he was heartbroken and ended up trying to kill himself a few times. This was about 6 years ago. He is okay, but he's never been the same since. I think he has a lot of guilt and basically blames himself for not protecting his son, even though he did everything he legally could have. I had a teacher in high school that was sexist as all hell. Only the girls got good grades. Male students who would get straight A's or A's and B's elsewhere were getting C's, and no male had an A. One of the girls with an A was, frankly, not very bright, but she was the teacher's pet point. Then there was just the constant cheat, she said. It's funny now, but was horrifying then. She was having us all critique each other's poems and nobody really wanted to for obvious reasons. She gave a quick little speech about how critique is meant to help, not harm, and a few guys raised their hands but no girls. Her eyes rolled back so hard I thought they might fly out, and she goes, figures the guys have nothing but criticism in this hugely nasty tone. Never seen someone so immediately hypocritical. She was crazy. Couldn't imagine an educator saying something like that in a race-related way or even a sexist way against girls, but against guys it was somehow acceptable. This regressive bullshit is why people like Trump are gaining prominence and power. White men realized what we were doing was disgraceful and, by and large, tried to stop. Some fuckwits took that opportunity to try to turn the tables and now we are more divided than ever. When I was in college I had an English class that was to be taught by a woman that I had never had a class from before. I showed up for class and there were 7 other students. Yeah, it was a small campus. In the class, all women. I thought to myself, oh, this should be fun, and took a seat at the back of the class. The first sign of trouble was about 5 minutes later when the teacher was handing out copies of the syllabus, and when she got to me in the back, I reached for it and she physically recoiled and looked like she was trying to stay as far away from me as possible, and she just put the paper down on the table. I gave her a "what the fuck was that" look, took the paper and moved on. During that first class and the next few lectures she would go off on tangents of her personal life. This included how she was very single, that men had wronged her several times, and was not looking for a relationship. None of this I cared about, but it was clear to me that she was definitely no fan of males in general. I was a little uncomfortable, but whatever, I just was going to get through the class and be done. Well, then came our first assignment. Something along the lines of a few page long essay on X, subject that I cared too little about to remember now. This class has been about 2 years ago now. I put enough work into my assignment that it was good enough for me to think that I had done a good job. I didn't expect 100%, but at least an A. I got my assignment back, and I don't think there were 2 consecutive sentences that didn't have some kind of mark on them. She was being terribly petty, saying I should have used different words or said something in another way, blah blah blah. Fortunately, the grading methods were quite strict at this school, so she couldn't deduct points for most of the marks she gave, but the marks were still there. She did take points where she could, but I still got a decent grade. I was a little perturbed, so I asked some of the other students how they fared. The 3 I talked to all got 100% with relatively few marks. These women all knew me from previous classes we had together, and they knew that I'm a decent guy. I showed them my paper. Teacher was not around, and they were quite disturbed by how many marks I had. We talked a bit about the sexism, and they agreed that even they were uncomfortable with the topics that the teacher was talking about on her tangents. They asked me what I was going to do, and I just told them that I wasn't sure at the time, and I just continued on with life. After several more assignments turned out the same way, I spoke with the student advisor to report what I believed was blatant sexism. He agreed, and I spoke to the Dean of Education and put in a formal complaint. The next semester, that teacher was nowhere to be found, and I was glad for it. I had found out later from other students and the student advisor that I talked to that apparently I was not the only victim of her sexism. I created a throwaway for reasons that will become obvious. I experienced institutionalized sexism throughout my youth. I'll try to keep this short. My parents divorced when I was about 10 years old. I have a sister who is 5 years older than me. Once my father moved out, I was regularly beaten, often types extremely badly, by my sister. You can laugh, but the size difference between a 16-year-old girl and an 11-year-old boy made this an easy task for her. My mother never lifted a finger to stop her. She knew what was going on, she didn't care. I was questioned at school as to why I came to school with bruises, black eyes, etc. They kept implying my father was doing it to me. When I finally told them the truth, I was told to learn to defend myself and basically buck up. It got worse. I suffered broken bones and was stabbed with a knife on one occasion and required surgery. At the hospital, I was taken aside and questioned. They again asked if my father had been the cause. I told them the truth. Nothing was done. When I was 14, my sister was 18. She came at me with a knife again. I defended myself. I ended up breaking her nose. I had self-defense knife wounds on my hands. My mother called the police this time because her daughter had been injured. The police pulled me aside and told me that I was lucky my sister decided not to press charges and I needed to seek professional help. I explained that I was defending myself. I listed a long history of physical abuse. They were not interested. Keep in mind, at this point my sister was a legal adult, had been in and out of drug rehab, was known to law enforcement, and basically was a giant piece of shit. At this point I decided I needed to get out of there. My mother had been awarded primary custody. I wrote a letter to the judge explaining the conditions I was under and that I needed to live in an environment that was violence free. It was ignored. About 6 months later I started hanging out with a pretty cool kid. Turns out this kid was the judge's son. He got his dad to listen to me. I moved in with my dad a month later. My life normalized after that. I also watched my mother use a system that was rigged in her favor to tear my father's life to pieces. She fabricated incidents of abuse. He was forced to pay alimony at a rate so unreasonable he had to take out loans to simply afford rent. She filed a bogus restraining order against him. The reason cited was that he was helping me trim our lawn at house that he owned half of at the time. TLDR, was severely physically abused by my sister growing up. No one would do anything because she wasn't a he. Couldn't leave to live with my dad because he had a business and was therefore not fit to raise a child. In the US, to receive student financial aid, you have to fill out a FAFSA, Federal Application for Student Aid. If you are female, you fill out all of the financial data, submit it, and that's that. You skip several boxes on the form. If you're male, you cannot skip those sections. In one of the sections, titled Selective Service Act, it is stated that, if you are male, you must fill this section. You are provided the option to either check yes and be entered into selective service, or check no. Below the checkboxes is a note stating to males that, if they check no, they are automatically ineligible for federal student aid. Female applying for FAFSA, go right ahead. Done. Male applying for FAFSA, only if you register for the draft. My seasonal job right now is in a tipped industry. My female counterparts receive 3 times the tips my male coworkers and I receive, and actually provide less services to the customers than we do. Regularly experienced preferential treatment given to girls in grade and middle school. Any mischief was blamed on the boys. Girls were always released early, given the easier activities, and rarely blamed. Thankfully, when I reached high school, this became much more rare, and in many cases, the sexes were treated rather equally. General distrust around children. Summer job was a lifeguard, was trusted with children to a degree while on duty, although my female coworkers were far more trusted with children. While off duty, if a child approached me, I was regarded with suspicion. Happened to me during my studies, to become an elementary school teacher. During our second year we had to take over a class for 3 months, to practice what we learned, and test our newly acquired skills. We are doing it in team. Since it was the first time, the university thought it would be a better idea to send 2 students for one class. Therefore if one failed or was really bad at it one day, the other one could take over, and the kid weren't that penalized by our incompetence. Fast forward to a few weeks, the kids got accustomed to me and my partner. I'm a man, she was a girl, and every morning we had that routine where we would sit the kid in a half circle and read them stories. We were teaching kindergarten, age 4 to 5. So every morning my partner would grab a book and usually pick a random kid to sit on her lap while she did the reading. We never heard anything negative out of this. The principal even came in the class one day and told us how nice it was to see that the kid liked us and felt secure with us. It had been a few weeks that we had been there, and I decided for the first time to do the same. One boy got on one of my leg while I was reading the book. It happened that day one of the parent came back to school because she forgot to give her kid his lunch. When she saw a kid on my leg she freaked out. The shitstorm that followed was incredible. I never finished my time at the school because the parents got together to kick me out of it, saying I was a sexual predator and stuff. Probably easy to guess, but I've dropped out of the program a few days later and never looked back. TLDR, my teaching partner used to sit a different kid each day on her lap while doing her reading. I did it once and got kicked out of the school for sexual harassment. I dated a girl for about 9 months during my senior year of high school. Things were pretty good all the way up to 3 months. One night I was talking to my buddy at a small Mexican restaurant I worked at. We started talking about my ex-girlfriend then, and about just how things seemed off, and how I couldn't put my thoughts around it. We were talking about how she would agree to hang out, and then say how she promised her friend that she would go to the animal shelter. A couple of days later she said, this was in the middle of a date, that she had to go see her friend Ben at an auto parts store. I said okay, yeah cool. Weeks went by, and I noticed how she was constantly talking to him and Snapchatting him when we were at dinner or at the movies. Then she commented how cute the guy was in front of us. So, the next time, when I was with my buddy at the restaurant I confronted her about him. She made the excuse how he was helping her with car parts, which did not make sense, because my dad is a service manager at a Ford store and we get parts pretty much at cost. I ended up saying well okay to it. She freaked out and told me I was being an abusive freak for asking about her friend Ben, and how I needed to not dig into her personal life, and how it's not my business. Oh, and her friend tweeted about how I'm such an abusive freak. I wasn't smart enough to leave then, but 5 to 6 months later my friend told me how she was in a conversation with my ex-girlfriend, and how she was talking shit. We were still together at the time. I confronted her after breaking up, and I got told how I'm a pig who needs to stay in his lane, and how I don't know everything. I have been single since then. She ruined it for me. Do kind non-sexist girls exist anymore? I sure hope so. Slightly different than most comments here, but I recently watched a semi-final game of women's baseball in a World Cup tournament. The announcer, a man, went on and on during the pregame and warm-ups about how 3 of the players we'd be watching were playing independent pro ball in the US, with and against men. I've played with and against indie ball guys and they are legit. Mostly guys who have been released from minor league teams trying to find a way back in. The standard is high, and they are all very athletic and even more determined to get back on contracts. It's pretty cutthroat from what I understand. So I was really excited to be able to watch a game that featured 3 female players who could compete at that level. Whoa. 2 of them were pitchers who couldn't top 78 miles per hour on their fastballs, could barely locate anything, and had breaking pitches equivalent to 14-year-old boys. The lone pro hitter was terrible ugly swings and could barely run and field. And the standard overall of the whole game was even worse. The hype only made it embarrassing. Now I realize that this all sounds like a girls can't play sports rant. What a dick jock. At least half of my girlfriends have been athletes and I love women's sports. As long as it's good. I realize that comparing with men's games can be tough, but if you watch high-level women's golf, tennis, soccer, volleyball, softball etc. then you know that these are finely tuned competitors that have dedicated themselves to being the best they can be, and often with little help and funding in sports that are world class, but are still amateur. If you compare a genuine professional in any field to an amateur, the difference is enormous. Gender doesn't matter. I've had my ass kicked by women in numerous things and I think it's awesome. I'm able to learn from being humbled. Now, 2 things piss me off about seeing the terribly low standard of the 3 women basketballers playing in independent ball. First, they are taking away spots from legitimate players. If they are there to sell tickets, get media attention, be a promotion and attract daddy-daughter nights, then what happens when people turn up and realize that these women aren't ready and are getting crushed? How do you tell your daughter that either women actually do suck at baseball, or you only have to be this good to play with men, and you'll still be considered competitive, even though you aren't? Secondly, and this is what hurts most, what happens when you are the first woman who legitimately deserves to play at that level, because you deserve to, and you are genuinely competitive with the men you are playing with and against? You will receive the respect from the other players, but you'll be what? The 38th woman to play at that level? I don't live in the US, so I'm not close enough to accurately follow what's really going on. Internet reports read like PR press releases. I would love for someone knowledgeable in this area to school me on this. All I know is that I've seen 14-year-old boys play better than these female pros, and I know these boys will only get better, and I've seen the standard of players that deserve to play at that level. The gap is literally miles apart. Sorry for Ant. My ex, female, of 3 years was always pursuing a great career. She did internships. We were based in Germany. During our relationship from the get-go 3 months Taiwan. I visited for 1 month. 4 months South Korea. I was there for a couple of weeks. Because she was a year ahead she did a lot of things while I was playing catch up. Everybody told me how supportive I'm in furthering my girlfriend's career yada yada. Initially we both agreed on pursuing our careers during the relationship, instead of blocking our passions. However she was constantly the victim. She told me I hadn't experienced the solitude of living alone in a foreign country. I lived in Belgium and the US together for about 14 months before that. I know how it's like, so I had to wake up at 4 AM, or whenever to talk to her, when she woke up etc. Then I landed a sweet gig in Brazil for 6 months, with the option to extend another 6 months. It was all I ever wanted. I was passionate about it. Well, 3 months into it, and she told me, I'm the victim. I feel alone. You left me point. And she cheated on me with some guy that she married 3 months after our official breakup, while I stayed in Brazil. Now this is faked up in itself. But every female friend I had said, it sucks. I'm sorry, but you did neglect her to pursue your career faking double standards. Family court, especially in a very liberal woman's lib state, cost me $50,000 in my career to get custody of my kids even with all sorts of evidence that my ex was a danger to our kids and a bad mom. Then for 3 kids I get $75 a month in child support total. And that's only because the judge made every reduction she could, and there is some sort of absolute minimum that has to be made, and it's $25 a kid. Every guy I know has to pay several $100s a month per kid regardless of how much they make. Domestic violence statistics from the Dodge show that men are on the receiving end of the abuse about 40% of the time, and are 7x less likely to report it. Yet too many groups claim men are the perpetrators 95% plus of the time and claim the remainder of cases are usually self-defense. I used to get abused by and so, when she didn't get her way, my family would see bruises and bite marks and scratches, and figured out what was going on, and kept telling me I needed to call the police when it got bad. Well, I finally did, and the cops arrested me, even though I had a fractured cheekbone and offensive wounds and purple bite marks and she didn't have any marks on her. The DA and judges were very harsh, and I ended up taking a deal where I'd get probation and had to go to a weekly domestic violence offender class for over a year at my expense. To complete the course I had to write an apology letter and also make statements about how abusive I was. Education: I took a number of sociology classes and many of my female instructors were pretty harsh on men and their curriculum. One class we watched a vaginoplasty, where a transsexual went through the male to female surgery. The teacher made comments about how we would all be better off without penizes. Lots of lectures about how essentially most sex was actually rap, that men aren't necessary other than sperm donors for fertility clinics, that a woman can't rap a man, that born was rap, even though we had an amateur born star in the class, and she was praised about how she was empowered, how breasts are for babies, and shouldn't be sexualized, male privilege, patriarchy, etc. Let me start out by saying that my story is not uncommon and is truly the eye-opening reason why the women in my life do not support feminism anymore. Once upon a time, I fell in love. Next thing I know, I'm waking up to a pregnant girlfriend. Shortly after that, I get married and join the military to support my family. When that's over and done with, I find myself out of work and she picks up the slack. That's cool. I'd been supporting the family for almost 8 years by this point. As the year progressed, I found her getting incredibly violent towards herself and me, constantly threatening to kill herself, trying to choke me out, etc. The behavior had always been there, but because I was focusing on making sure our family had the funds to survive, it got to the point where my daughters would worry about mom going to sleep and not waking up. So I made her get in contact with a mental health treatment center near where we lived. She attended one appointment before she started making excuses as to why she couldn't go. Eventually the situation escalated to her cancelling an appointment for the umpteenth time, and when I called her on it, she choked me out yet again and proceeded to try to crush me with her body weight. She was significantly larger than me, the term dependopotamus. The police were called after I had managed to escape the death crush, and I agreed to meet up with an officer away from the house. The long story short, I was charged with domestic violence because I threw her. Again, she was north of 300 pounds. I'm lucky to break 160 by the throat and broke the couch. I was served with a year of no contact orders against not only her, which I don't have an issue with, but also my daughters. She gets to continue living, tormenting me with emails that I can't respond to, constantly goading me into trying to break this chain she put on me. Again, my story isn't the only one like it. Women are seen as the victims 90% of the time. I know I have very little chance of getting my daughters back in the divorce. Ladies, pay attention. This is it. This is what institutional sexism looks like. This is what male privilege really is. I was at a supermarket and there was a child, about 3 years I think, running up and down the aisles on their own. I looked around for a parent/guardian, but couldn't find one. I managed to intercept the child on one of their loops back up an aisle, and just sat with them to make sure they were okay, find out who they came in with. Then over the speakers an announcement is made about a missing child, and gave their name and description, and asked if they could be brought to the front desk where their mother is waiting. So I ask the child if that's their name and they say yes, and I begin to lead the child towards the desk. On my way there several other people notice the child matching the announced description, and begin shouting that I am kidnapping them. I try to turn to explain, but security have heard the shouts and rush over and put me in an arm lock before I can explain. By this point the mother has seen and rushes over angrily screaming that I stole her baby and the crowd doesn't question her. It took me another half hour for convince security that I really did only want to return the child to its parent and not abduct them. It's been a few years since then and now see the child in the supermarket every now and then. They always wave to me. I think the mother knows I'm not a threat, but she always ignores me, if she even remembers me. Not me but my boss. Let's call him Greg. He told me about how he was fired. He once worked at a hardware store in Australia. He was around 23 years old, had a wife and a baby on the way, and this was in the early 2000s I think. FYI, Greg is by far the nicest guy I ever met. Just a real fair income attitude and hard worker. While working with a construction company, a new girl arrived. She was a stingy looking and had a bad temper, but to her credit did her job. She was office admin as was he. One day, a month or so after she joined the company, the girl didn't show for work. She was 18, and they assumed she was hungover or something. As the day went on, and she never called to tell them why she didn't come to work. Eventually they contacted her to get the story before the day ended. If you haven't worked in a trade, especially construction, you basically can't just not show up when on the roster, even if it's office work. The next day Greg was asked to come into the office by the boss. He was told the girl accused him of harassing her, and she didn't want to come into work. Because of him. He asked what the accusations were specifically. They wouldn't tell him. He asked when she said he harassed her. They wouldn't tell him. His boss essentially told him it was his word against hers, and he wasn't going to get into a whole heap of trouble defending his, as if the locals thought he was defending a sexist harasser, so he fired him on the spot. He was defamed by the girl's parents and her boyfriend, while the community turned their back on him. His wife nearly left him, only staying because she thought it would be best for the baby. Greg took the company to court over unfair dismissal and won. Apparently during the case the girl's story broke down within 10 minutes of questioning, not on the stand, and admitted to making it all up. The official story is that she wasn't getting along with her boyfriend and was sad about that fact. Apparently her parents had come over to visit her one day, and she was crying, and they were concerned. She didn't want to admit to her parents or her boyfriend that she was having relationship troubles because she thought they would have intervened and made her move back home. Her boyfriend wasn't abusive, it was just they both worked all the time and didn't do much, even though they lived together. She was fresh out of school and was still immature. So she made up a story about how she was being harassed at work and pointed the finger at Greg randomly to cover the fact that she was having relationship troubles. My boss was once fired for harassment and life nearly ruined with no evidence to prove that he did anything wrong by a woman who used him as a scapegoat for her own personal troubles. His former boss was more worried that if he questioned the woman's accusation, that cold been taken by the community as a sexist attitude and he would have lost business or labeled as a harasser himself, so he fired him on the spot. Second year of university. I was taking the same courses as Jay. We were study partners. Jay was a young woman from an incredibly rich family. Jay was studying part-time and didn't have to work. I was studying full-time and holding down a full-time job at the same time. I've got no problem with Jay. She was a really cool and down-to-earth person. Her older sister was the epitome of an entitled rich bitch, but that isn't the issue here. Came a time when we were both struggling to hand in an essay on time. Jay told me that she had gone to the male professor and, in her own words, turned on the tears, i.e. she'd gone to the male authority figure and cried fake tears. Jay got an extension period on the essay. Again, I don't blame Jay for that. She was just using the tools at her disposal. More power to her. I hadn't even considered asking the professor for an extension. But after Jay told me that she had gotten one, I went to the professor the day after Jay did. I explained that I was working a full-time job as well as studying full-time. As a guy, I didn't have the option of turning on the tears. To this point Jay and I had had exactly the same grades. The professor looked at me with utter contempt and told me that I probably wasn't cut out for university. I've never felt so small in my life. I didn't get an extension. I flunked the course. Jay got a final grade that was mathematically impossible unless she'd gotten 200% on the final exam, because she'd cried. Ever since then I've despised women who use fake tears. When I was 20 I had moved in with my sister and her family because I was in a rough financial position. My sister lived with her boyfriend and her 2 daughters, my nieces, ages 4 and 6 at the time, who were from a previous failed relationship. The father got custody on the weekends, and for the most part, he had a healthy friendly relationship with my sister. Then one afternoon in late September, niece #1 went missing. She didn't meet my sister outside her elementary school in their usual spot. After 30 minutes of panic and frantic searching, the cops are called, and a search is issued. I was at home, and upon hearing the news, I throw on my shoes, and begin running to the school to help search. I didn't make it halfway to the school, before I was stopped by a police cruiser. They asked if I was uncle. I said yes. They asked me to come downtown with them, so I did. I didn't know what they wanted. I was scared that something happened too. When I got to the police station, I was told to wait for questioning, that I was a suspect in my niece's disappearance. I wasn't under arrest, they just wanted to ask questions, but it still made my blood boil. I didn't cause a scene though. I figured if I complied and cooperated, it would allow them to move on and find my niece. When I was seated, I recognized 2 men from afar. My sister's current boyfriend and ex-boyfriend were also brought in for questioning. 5 minutes later, my brother comes through the door escorted by police. They were literally gathering every male figure in my niece's life and interrogating them. Before me or my brother could be brought in for questioning, we were suddenly let go. They found my niece down by the creek. Turns out what happened was she wasn't feeling good, so she snuck out of class, attempted to walk home and got lost. At the end of the day, I'm just happy nothing happened, and I'm thankful that the police department took action. But seriously, there's gotta be some better interior methods out there than simply rounding up the men, especially since none of the 4 of us have a legal or psychological history. They had no evidence to suggest I had something to do with her disappearance. I have 4 sisters, a mother, 5 nieces, and several female cousins and close female family friends, and not one of them was brought in for questioning. I was once severely reprimanded for questioning the credentials of a female coworker. I brought my observations and recorded facts and rookie mistakes she made that were not in line with the experience she proclaimed. She was really good at bullshitting her way to management style folk. Just enough book knowledge to fool people that know barely anything, but far from enough to fool people that worked in it for a long time. It was regarded as sexist by me, even though our division had a 1/5 female workforce, which was really high for it at that time and now would still be considered quite impressive, and I made no issue about any of the other female coworkers before that. Each and every one of them hired after me, some fresh out of school. I started planning my exit from that company right away because I'm autistic and don't do well in places where bullshit politics like that go above knowledge and facts. Up until that point, this had never been an issue. This new person was a disturbance in the force. In going into that mode, I also retreated from the social group in the company and had no contact with anyone there besides what was necessary to complete the projects and work. Side note, having just one single manipulative person like that enter any group, even social groups, can cause massive havoc. Really, be wary. A month or 2 later, about a week before I planned to ask for my notice and announce my resignation, 2 female coworkers went to management with the same opinion about this new coworker, with the same information, supplemented by some more events that showed she didn't have the credentials she was hired on, adding that she made the same mistakes multiple times, showing she wasn't even learning from her past mistakes. This finally triggered a check of her previous employment and other credentials, and ended with her being fired the same week. A day before I was going to resign, the same 2 women that reported her came to me and asked me not to resign, telling me they were made aware what was going on. To this day I still have no idea how they knew I was leaving, and even less so how they knew the approximate date. I guess the good about this is that in a working group dynamic, people will even bother to get to know a socially stunted autistic dude and prefer him over some manipulative harpy. My wife and I were having an argument once, on opposite sides of the bedroom. I wanted more space to flail my arms in frustration. She wanted to sit. It just so happened that we were on opposite sides of the room. I had a brief moment of suicidal tendencies during the argument, and my wife responded by saying, "King, it hurts when you say that." Immediately I heard my roommate's husband rush down the stairs to my mother-in-law's room and tell her that I was beating the shit out of my wife, that I was a horrible, abusive, uncontrollable assailant. I was never told if the cops were threatened on me, but knowing him, it was an active thought. Luckily, my mother-in-law shut his ass down hard and told him that I would never do that I grew up being physically abused, and I would never want to have anyone see that pain in their lifetime. She told him that usually I'm the one to help with groceries and cooking, and that if it came down to it, I would likely sacrifice myself so that any one of my friends could live. He dropped it, but I could tell from the way he looked at me out of the corner of his eyes the next day that he didn't believe her, and to him, I was the most disgusting thing that walked the earth. From then on he had an almost condescending tone with me. The funny part of this all, I'm terribly afraid of men, and since he was a head and shoulders taller than me, I was absolutely terrified of what he would do to me if I had accidentally pissed him off. I've experienced both negative and positive sexism. Negative, being expected to do shitty jobs and not complain, which honestly, I don't complain about it anyway. I pay more for insurance when I've never had an accident, and pay far more attention to the road than 90% of women I have been in a vehicle with. Yes, I understand that women get in more accidents, but men are more often at the center of the worst accidents. I'm surprised it still doesn't equal out though. Another, if I were to walk down the street at night, I'm likely to be viewed as some sort of predator. I don't get cheap drinks at bars, though I have gotten coffees and other random things for free from women working at places and hitting on me, so I guess that's kinda cool, but not to do with sexism. When it comes to renting a place to live, I've been treated as though I'm going to destroy the place, which is actually kind of funny to me, because every female roommate I had back in the day were always the ones to fuck shit up. Literally had one dumb enough to leave a roll of paper towel on a hot stove top. She freaked out, and I ended up having to grab oven mitts and throw it outside in the snow to put it out, as I didn't want to get the extinguisher dust everywhere. My landlady refuses to rent to women now, because it was almost always women that caused her problems in comparison to men. From her words, men generally abide by the rules and women have no respect for them. So that's a negative/positive depending on what experiences your landlord has had. If you look at your local housing/rooming listings though, chances are you're going to see female preferred, which could be for a whole host of reasons, including a woman preferring to live another woman, etc. I'm expected to pay for things. I never do, because fuck that shit, haha. I do heavy lifting, even if the women I work with are perfectly capable of it, but are too lazy to, i.e. I've seen them do it perfectly fine before, but I was busy and couldn't do it for them at the time, so they were forced to. I don't really care so much about that one, but it's an example, so I listed it. As for positive, I have had bosses be attracted to me, and the fact that I generally fit the gender stereotype for a masculine man. Many times have I been complimented and hit on by female bosses for having traits/doing things that are masculine. It actually helps me get away with so much shit that I wouldn't be able to otherwise. Men are more inclined to work with me than if they were to work with women. Have been told this many times. Partially because of my work ethic and that I'm generally good at everything I put effort into, and partially because a lot of men don't seem to enjoy working with women for many reasons. Personally, it's not usually my first choice either, as I tend to work better with men than women. Used to have absolutely no preference when I started working. After a decade though, I'm not an old fart yet. That has definitely changed. Mostly because in my experience it has been 1,000 times easier and more relaxing to problem solve with men than most women I've worked with. Have had a few women that were fantastic in that regard, and better than a lot of men are. But they do not seem to be anywhere near the norm. There can be both good and bad, helpful and harmful. It exists for both sides though. This is probably not going to be a story a lot of you enjoy reading, but it happened. For anyone who has an issue with it, I know I'm not a saint. When I was in high school, there was this prick of a guy who lived on my street. We'll call him Dave. He had a hood rat girlfriend. We'll call her Sarah. Dave liked to bully people, particularly these two kids on our block. One was small for his age and the other was autistic. At first, I thought it was just light-hearted joking around, because I was young. But shit started to get real bad, and I was getting fed up with it. One day, after Dave picks the smaller kid up and drops him headfirst into a trash can, I decide that I've had enough. I kick Dave in the gut, pin him in the ground, and start punching his face into the ground. I raise my arm to keep punching him, and Sarah full on home run, hits me in the ribs with a baseball bat. At the time, it was the hardest I'd ever been hit in my life. I knee Dave in the dig as I'm trying to recover and defend myself against his armed girlfriend, trying to make sure he stays down. She swings again, but doesn't get a full swing, because I've already gotten into her personal space. At this point, I didn't care that she was a girl. I was certain at least one of my ribs was severely damaged, and I was swimming in pain and adrenaline. So, I punched her in the face, right in the jaw, and she folded like a piece of paper. I broke her jaw in 2 places, and blacked her eye. Blacked both of Dave's eyes, and knocked out 2 of his teeth. I ended up with 2 broken ribs, 3 broken knuckles, and a bruise that covered my entire left side for months. We ended up going to court, of course. I was lucky enough that the smaller kid who was being bullied watched the whole thing. Some people were watching from their houses too. They dropped the assault charges that were on me thanks to the jury, but I still had community service for months. Sarah went to juvie and Dave had to do community service and go to therapy and shit. Regardless of it being self-defense, I was called a woman beater for the rest of high school. About 10 months ago I was at college and was told matter-of-factly by my female teacher that if you're not a feminist you're automatically a sexist and must hate women. Now, for personal reasons I would never call myself a feminist, but I don't believe that this automatically makes me a sexist raging misogynist. I told her that I respectfully disagreed with her opinion and said that I believed that you could be both a non-feminist and still support women's rights. This didn't go down well with her, and she refuted my position without listening to anything I said. A few seconds later she tells me that, since I'm a straight white male I wouldn't understand the problems that women have faced in a patriarchal society such as ours. I asked her if she was being serious, and she responded with a yes. Next thing I knew I was being called a racist/sexist/homophobe bigot by the majority of the class, including some friends. You name it, I was called it despite them never having any evidence to prove it. It's honestly horrible to experience the horror stories that you read about universities and colleges. I've always personally seen them and said these people are a minority opinion, so it's unreasonable to view them as a majority. However, I think it's unacceptable to call someone these things and highlight certain characteristics and play them off as a negative aspect of oneself. I said that she was being sexist and defamatory, so I got kicked out of class. I was trying to become a police officer. During the physical test we had to do 20 push-ups and sit-ups back to back. They both had a specific requirement. Touch a sponge to the ground with your chest on the push-ups. Specifically is what I had a problem with. The officer critiquing me made me redo half of the push-ups because I didn't go down all the way allegedly. The ground was uneven at best and sloped inward where my body was. I would have had to lay down to touch the sponge, so I told the officer when she made me redo them, started to immediately yell at me that she'd DQ me. I moved the sponge and busted out whatever she called out. No problems. The girl next to me, cheered her on. Did she go down all the way? Not even close. At the time I had 10% body fat and worked out daily. This girl was in no position to be there. But for every 50 dudes there was one woman trying out. So, I get it. But slightly bending your arms and aggressively cocking your torso down to look like movement doesn't count to me. There were over 1,000 people there trying out. Over half gone from the written and pre-background checks. By the time the physical rolled around it might have been 25%. Once again, I understand the need for diversity, but I monitored that girl since we were in the same group, and yeah, there was more shenanigans. In any job you have that is generally more female, male heavy. Point before med school I worked as an HCSW to improve my application in a mental health hospital. so the nurses are in charge of a shift, and the rest of the HCAs are predominantly female. This was a male mental health hospital, aged 18 to 64, so certain tasks made sense to have a male do it. Photocopying on a night shift though. The photocopier and fax machines were all upstairs, which is a patient-free area, numerous locked doors, admin staff and the doctor's offices during the day, empty at night. Adam has to do it. I'm not going upstairs at night. It's haunted. In fact, any job usually. I've worked in retail loads, and any job which involves any degree of physical discomfort, such as checking the freezer stock or pushing a cage, equals male job. Women are generally assigned customer-facing roles. Men do grunt work. The female employees never ask for this. In fact, customer-facing roles are usually resented as they are more psychologically demanding. Fake happiness all the time, but it's the norm. Stock cages aren't heavy, and I'm sure just as many females are annoyed at this assignment as males are. Just notice whenever you go to a supermarket. Checkout staff, nearly all female. Stock replenishers, nearly all male. When I was working at a college bookstore, I had to call a customer about an online order that they had made. He had ordered a particular sweatshirt, but we didn't have the size he asked for. I called him and told him that we were out of that one, but we could give him a size larger or smaller, or we could find a different product and switch them for the order. He said he wanted to get a different sweatshirt, and then said, "Are there any women working there that could help pick out something? Can you put a woman on the phone instead?" I rolled my eyes and passed the phone to a female coworker. I was more amused than offended, but it was pretty silly. I mean, just because I'm a guy doesn't mean that I don't know anything about our clothing merchandise. He just so happened to be right because I usually worked in the textbook department and really didn't know anything about our clothing merchandise, but he couldn't have known that. More seriously, there was also the rule that women were straight up not allowed to take out the garbage. So if I was doing a million things already, but happened to be the only guy on shift, I had to do garbage. No exceptions. Even if there were girls just standing around the register with nothing to do, and I had work to do right up until closing, I still had to be the one to find the time to do garbage. That was a pain in the ass. Don't know if it equates to sexism, but once I was having a conversation with a girl that I met over Tinder, and apparently her boss repeatedly harassed her and physically abused her once. I told her, why not tell your hours or get a restraining order? She was like, no, I won't do this because I love my job and that I'll deal with this somehow, and that who would believe me if I said something like this, and that he is a boss and all blah blah. Eventually we stopped talking, at least for a while, and after a few months she again starts talking about it, and that she finally filed a police complaint and also reported to the hours. I was like, this is great, you should be proud of yourself, and that people like your boss deserve to be in jail instead of workplace. But wow, the load of crap I got after saying that was kinda shocking for me. She told me that you don't know shit about her boss, and that how could you come to a conclusion like that? I was like, wasn't it you who got harassed by that very same person? Classic Stockholm syndrome. I've worked at a Carolina-based grocery store chain for 2.5 years or so now. I've always been a cashier, and working at this store is sort of a family thing. My grandmother worked for this chain for 30 plus years. My dad, my uncle, and my cousin have all either worked for or are currently working for this chain in the same city. The managers at the store will promote cashiers that they trust and feel confident to working at the front desk, being what we call guest service leaders, or GSLs. The problem is, all but 2 of them are female. The 2 that aren't were under different management whenever they were promoted to GSL. Not that I want more authority over people, I just feel that it's wrong, since I'm male, that I do not get promoted. They have promoted girls that are 16 or 17 years old and or have worked at the store for 2 months to work the desk. Grocery business is very political too, and since my family has a good reputation with the store and the chain, it makes no sense to me as to why these girls who have no idea what they are doing get promoted. All of them, all of the girls that have been promoted after about my first year of working there would constantly come to me for questions about things I shouldn't know about running the front end, because I've seen it all happen. But nope. I'm male and obviously aren't qualified nor trusted enough to work at the desk. I have asked the store manager about it and he said he'd think it over and hasn't got back to me. I asked the front end manager what she thought and she couldn't give me a real answer as to why I wasn't a GSL yet. I don't really know if this was sexism, but I'll tell it anyway. Me and a friend are trying to form a band and we still are, having trouble finding a guitarist. We met because we both do a service that forms bands based on your skill level and taste in music. If you're interested in what it's called, shoot me a PM. The group after us, all girls of varying age ranges, apparently had a really good guitarist. The only problem? She was 12 years old. However, me and my friend were attempting to form a band separate from this organization. When I was waiting for my mother to get me, I went inside the studio to get out of the rain. My instructor was there, talking to the mother of the guitarist from the band after us. I saw this as an opportunity and immediately attempted to ask the guitarist if she was interested in joining the band that me and my friend were forming. However, her mother shot me down with "Oh, I think she's a bit too young to be in an off-site band." Now, that would have been completely fine, and I wouldn't have perceived that as an attack had she not said this in a tone of voice that was, for all intents and purposes, incredibly accusatory. The best part is that she, the girl's mother, was actually excited about the idea until she heard that it was an off-site band. I'm 16, my friend is 15. Worked at a place where the wife of the business owner liked to check the men's bathroom door when you were in there. Different job years later, had a receptionist feel me up, just casually reached out to run her fingers over my abs. She'd given birth in the past year or so and never been particularly friendly to me either. I was so livid I said nothing, just briefly glared. Made sure to keep a couple of feet distance between myself and the receptionist from that point on. I'm constantly a victim of girls/women, often in long-term relationships, who flirt/etc. but flake out/withdraw while accusing me of being a creep/etc. And then they get really vengeful when I make it clear I have no interest in their games. Takes a week or so to start seeing the results of character assassination, which is always great to see who the white knights who are so desperately led they don't realize they're really just pawns, fighting as a proxy. Years back, I had a fallout with a roommate whose parents owned the duplex. Consequently, the roommate considered the entire house her domain and there was no privacy to be had. I worked 7 days a week, some of which were graveyards. My roommate would wake me when she got in from the bars cause no one picked her up. After the third time, I put a lock on the door. Things finally came to a head, no pun, when the roommate decided she was kicking me out. It destroyed my roommate when her mom got involved to finally say no to my roommate and the cops came. I'd probably have been arrested/etc. if it was for my roommate having a complete breakdown in front of the cops. I'll never forget being on the step of the front door, hearing my roommate scream at the cops to take off their shoes downstairs. 3-story, roommate had entire bottom floor. My roommate's mother apologized to me. The roommate stayed at her only friend's house and I moved out before having to cross paths again. It wasn't worth sticking out another month to get my damage deposit. Yoga is notorious for sexism against guys. Lots of women who want to beak off about how yoga is feminine. I had one female instructor who loved to shut these people down, educating them on the history of yoga. What we do know of it came from India and was taught to monks. It originally was male only. Most of the women who talk crap do yoga very casually. Mind your own practice. It's the mark of a good instructor who shuts down these toxic people. I used to have long hair and worked a job where they told me I could not wear it down. Ponytail was fine. On that note, lots of jobs where guys are not allowed to color/dye their hair outside of natural colors. I used to work at a Waffle House as a waiter and have customers tell me they either don't tip males or they don't tip males as much since waiting was a girl's job. I'm fairly sure I did good work since my manager kicked me out of night shift fairly fast and put me on mornings, which had the highest volume, profit margins, and required you to be on the ball. I was never on drugs or drank at work, so I doubt it was my work ethic either. Most of the time I was fine with it, but when someone would sit in my section and refuse to let me do my job because of my gender, it wasn't just annoying, it ate into my bottom line. I got paid $2 an hour, all of my money came from tips, and you're going to sit in my section, 4 booths, and chastise me about how I shouldn't work there, then give one of the girls I work with $20 because she has nice eyes. Another event happened. Right before I left for another job, a woman came in with friends after a night of drinking. She was super flirty, and both her and her friends seemed like they were having a great time. Near the end of their meal she offered me a job at her restaurant. She apparently owned a chain and offered me her number so we could talk about it. I politely declined and let her know that in 3 days I was going across the country for another job. She went from on top of the moon to yelling at me about how shitty the service was, telling me that I'd never be able to find a decent job, got up and left cussing me out for declining her offer. Her 2 friends basically stared at her the whole time, quietly asked to pay the bill, and forced her to leave, while she cursed my existence and told everyone how awful I was. They didn't tip either. I'm a male nurse. I've been doing it for years and it's never been an issue with any co-workers or patients. I've never even been the only male nurse in any department I've ever worked in. I did have one female patient one time who seemed to take issue with it, however. I introduced myself to her as a nurse and she looked at me skeptically, one eyebrow raised. You're kidding, right? I didn't really think she was serious at first as I had never had my credentials questioned before, so I just ignored the comment and proceeded to explain the meds I was going to administer to her. She stopped me again and ironically addressed the male physical therapist. This guy's kidding, right? He's not actually a nurse. The physical therapist confirmed I was a nurse and she started laughing really hard. Oh my god. I thought that was a joke like in Meet the Focus. She continued in her hysteria for several minutes and finally looked me straight in the face and said, "That is insane. I can't believe I actually met a male nurse in real life. Wow. Are you the only one?" I tried to explain I wasn't when she cut me off. "I'm sorry, and no offense to your gay stuff, but I really would feel a lot more comfortable with a female nurse." I left the room and traded patients with a female co-worker. I'm not gay, and I think I act like an average regular guy when dealing with patients. I cannot literally even think of another instance where a patient or anyone else has even batted an eye when I introduced myself as a nurse. This was a strange outlier. I also found it weird she had no issues with her male doctors, physical therapist, or even the CNA who wiped her ass. I guess she was just of the opinion that a man cannot be called a nurse. Regularly at work. I work in a hospital department with 90% females and hard or disgusting stuff can often fall on me to do. No reason other than being male. Comments from patients and staff can get pretty taxing. Any friendly interaction with male staff gets labeled a boys club with an implication you are leaving women out deliberately. It gets really bad when it comes to advancement or trying to further your skills and professional practice because the women see it as favoritism or sexism when you are just trying to do your job better or advance your position. Occasionally, depending on what I'm wearing, a patient will mistakenly refer to me as a doctor, which upsets people, even though I always correct it. It's not my fault I have to dress differently and sometimes the same as the doctors, because that's just frizz pants and a business shirt, and I act with confidence. At uni I reported harassment and stalking and physical threats, but got ignored and told I could deal with. I was even told that if I was an 18-year-old girl, not a then 23-year-old male, it would be different. Might be a bit off topic, but sometimes out on the town groups of girls can be really awful and just expect for it to be accepted. Where if I said or did anything similar I would be kicked out or even be open to legal action. I think the one that stings most there is trying to move past a group of girls blocking a hallway or entrance. I say excuse me or have to tap the shoulder to get their attention and am greeted with EWW. No. Imagine saying that to a girl's face because she made eye contact with you. There are so many double standards I could talk about. So many times where being a guy makes something harder than it should be, but what's the point? I see a lot of people posting about women being sexist towards men. I'll add one about the opposite. Let's not all forget that men being sexist towards women is still a big issue. It's far from solved. So here's my experience and reaction as a guy seeing other people be sexist towards my friends. I remember being in college, walking down the street one evening with a now ex friend that we'll call John and two of our female friends. John knew that I had a kind of friends with benefits thing going on with one of the girls from time to time, we'll call her Jane. John and I were handing back a bit with the girls walking in front of us. I believe we were headed down the street from our apartment area. A lot of students live there as it was adjacent to campus but not affiliated, to get something to eat from somewhere. The girls were up ahead a bit and involved in some conversation of their own. John here starts eyeballing the girls and makes a comment under his breath about how fine they were and starts trying to dig me for details on how Jane was in bed. After a minute or two of trying to explain to him that he should ask her if he wants to know and that I wasn't going to violate her privacy like that, he starts making an obscene fingering gesture and goes, "Hey, let's walk up behind them and get them interested. You already know they want it, right?" Needless to say, he and I are not friends anymore.